Well, thank you, everybody. I'm very gratified and honored to be here with you tonight with an illustrious panel of participants and what I believe to be one of the most beautiful art forms in the world. We are celebrating Surimono, which has been my personal passion for over 45 years. And unquestionably, it should be considered the acme of the woodblock printing medium. Surimono embodied the nuanced relationship between word and image, requiring very careful orchestration between artist, poet, block carver, and printer. As such a collaborative genre, they may also be seen as a particularly pertinent topic for this challenging and fraught time that we are all in. The poetry groups that commissioned these deluxe prints consisted of individuals, very much mostly men, from various social milieu, professions, and even in many cases social outcasts in any other context, such as kabuki actors or entertainers. People from different strata were able to intermingle and be brought together to celebrate and create art and poetry. Indeed, they broke social barriers. So might I ask you all tonight who've joined us, as we hear about and look at these glorious small jewels of printmaking, to allow these rare and delicate gems to inspire us to do better, to be more accepting and supportive of others, regardless of their social status, wealth, background, and expand our horizons for this country and for our planet. So that being said, I want to tell you a little bit about this series. Tracy, could we go back to the slide before? That I put together where I dreamed this up over cocktails with Andrea Durstein, who was the director at Oberlin College, who we featured in our last presentation, to bring to light shuttered exhibitions of Japanese art in nested or teaching institutions. Institutions that have not only put wonderful shows together with scholarly content, but have done monumental research and publications that will withstand the test of time and be important reference tools in the decades to come. Also, all three exhibitions and collections are single owner collections and were gifts of a century ago, or a current gift that is in the making by incredibly generous and philanthropic individuals. Hopefully this autumn, the lights will be turned back on and we will actually get in our cars, if not on airplanes, and be able to go and see these relit exhibitions in the flesh. But shy of that, hopefully we will get a taste for that, and hopefully you will go order these publications online, be well read and ready to see the shows when the doors reopen. Tonight with us, we have curators from over 13 major museums totally across the country. Some of them are recognized scholars in their fields, some of whom are even published authors on the field of Surimono. And we have several people here who are prominent collectors, other collectors from coast to coast of the Surimono genre. We also have docents from museums here hoping to learn and to educate others. And that is the silver lining of such a Zoom talk, that we can have people literally in Moscow and in Malaysia at the same time, all together, waking up with an alarm clock, I think, to be here with us today. But we can share the love and passion and the vision of gifted and far-sighted collectors and celebrate Japanese art and the human endeavor tonight. I also, before introducing our speakers, would like to thank Catherine Martin of Shuttered Gallery for the support of Asia Week New York in the series of panel discussions, and to thank Tracy and my team at the gallery who have spent countless hours in putting this program together for you. So we have the creme de la creme from Yale University here with us tonight. Stephanie Wiles is the Henry J. Kravitz II Director of the Yale University Art Gallery. She began her career in the Department of Drawings and Prints at the Morgan Library and Museum, where she was appointed to various curatorial roles over a 16-year tenure. With a scholarly focus on works of art on paper, she was later appointed director of the Allen Memorial Museum of Art at Oberlin College, and in fact was the one who hired Andrea to begin with. In 2011, she was named the Richard J. Schwartz Director of the Herbert F. Johnson Museum of Art at Cornell University, also a museum well endowed with two Surimono collections. Stephanie earned her BA in Modern Languages from Hobart and William and Smith Colleges and her PhD in Art History from the Graduate School at CUNY. Japanese woodblock prints, and especially the delightful poetry and technical complexity of Surimono prints, have held a fascination for her throughout her career. A graduate of Columbia, Denise Petri-Leidy is the Ruth and Bruce Dayton curator and head of the Asian Art Department at Yale University Art Gallery. Prior to joining the staff at Yale, she served as the Brooke Russell Astor Curator of Chinese Sculpture and Decorative Arts Emerita at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, as well as working at both the Asia Society and the Museum of Fine Arts Boston. Dr. Leidy has, I have to say Denise, has curated numerous exhibitions and gallery rotations and is a prolific author with many museum publications and scholarly articles on a broad range of Asian art topics spanning the history and cultures of South and East Asia. And she is a co-student of mine from our days at Columbia in Asian art history back in the Wild West of the 70s. So again, we go back a long time. Sadako Oki is the Japan Foundation Curator of Japanese Art at Yale University Art Gallery. She has curated memorable exhibitions and written for their accompanying publications, including The Elegant Tea Culture of Japan of 2009 and Byobu, The Grandeur of Japanese Screens in 2014. She has written extensively in numerous scholarly publications about her lifelong passion of Japanese calligraphy. The Private World of Surimono Japanese Prints from the Drosten Kenadjian collection has been a project on which Sadako has worked on intermediately over a decade. Published by Yale University Press just 3 months ago, this exquisite and informative book illuminates the intertwined relationships between Japanese art, language, and literature in the first half of the 19th century through the combination of imagery and poetry. Last but far not least among our academicians here is Adam Halliburton, who is the PhD candidate in the Department of East Asian Languages and Literature at Yale University. He also received his BA from Yale in 2010 and is the co-author of this impressive new volume and subject of tonight's discussion. I will say, quite frankly, his talents at untangling the hidden meanings and references of these cryptic prints and how he reveals them in his own artful poetry in English makes this book a joy to read. And dare I say, working with Adam briefly and reading what he's written, I see another John Carpenter in the making, and hopefully we can get him off of this language stuff and move him into the world of art history so he can follow in John's footsteps completely. And lastly, I have no written introduction because I was told not to. I must introduce the marvelous collectors, Shawan and Patrick Kenadjian, friends of multi-decade standing, and I will talk a little bit about my personal relationship with them and them as the ideal collectors that every dealer dreams about in a short while. So those are, there they are. Shawan and Patrick, we first met, my husband Bob and I, in the late 70s when they were all very junior lawyers at their joint firm, Davis Polk and Wardwell in Paris. And we have enjoyed many trips to some of the most beautiful parts of the world, including time spent together in Japan. And their love and passion for art, not just Japanese art, has no equal. I know of no couple who's seen more exhibitions in more museums in more countries on a regular basis than Shawan and Patrick. Their knowledge of art, global art, is profound. And as such, they are, as I said, my dream clients and very dear friends. So I would like to start our questions. And my first question is for Denise. No, actually for Stephanie. I would like to open the floor to Stephanie to give her introduction as the director of the Yale University Art Gallery, and give us a little bit of tour for those of us who've never been there, who should get there, and maybe we'll get there in the future when the campus reopens. Stephanie?
Thank you. Thank you, Joan. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you so much, Joan, for bringing us these really fun and stimulating talks. It was great to see my former Oberlin colleagues at the last event. And of course, I want to give my profound thanks to Shawan and Patrick, who really immersed us all into the world of Surimono in such important ways over the past years. So thank you, Shawan and Patrick. What I'll do today, before I turn it over to my colleagues, is just briefly orient you to the art gallery and the Asian collection by way of the buildings. And I hope that we will be open and able to host many of you as soon as possible, but we're not quite there yet. So the gallery is the first college art museum in the United States. It was founded in 1832 by artist John Trumbull. The original building is no longer standing, but what you see on the screen here today are 3 buildings along Chapel Street in New Haven. And these were woven together in a transformative renovation that was undertaken by my predecessor, Jock Reynolds. Jock was director of the art gallery for 20 years, and he and many of my colleagues at the gallery completed this project in 2012. I think it's informative to look at these buildings separately. What you see on the screen at the lower right is a neo-Gothic type style building that's designed by Peter Bonnet White. This is known as Street Hall, and many of you, there are a few Yale alumni on our call today, many have had studio classes here, art history classes, and then also visited collections in this building over the years. Today, the Street Hall houses the American collection. The middle building that you see on the screen that looks kind of like the Bargello in Florence is the Old Yale Art Gallery. And in 1926, you can see if you glance down again at the white building, in 1926, this was attached to Street Hall with a bridge, which is a very important part of our, shows our Impressionist paintings today. And then if you go to the upper left, you see the Louis Kahn building from 1953. This is a fantastic modernist building that underwent a renovation. It opened with a poetic mixture of, that you can even see, I think, from the slide, masonry, concrete, glass, and steel. And the Asian collection is housed on the 2nd floor of the Louis Kahn building. So if you could, next slide, please. Thank you. And before I turn it over to my colleague, Denise Leidy, I just wanted to point out how when she came to the gallery, leaving the Met in about 2017, she really masterminded an extraordinary reinstallation of the Asian collections. And one of my favorite parts of this, of Denise's installation, is how she used the light and the views of the Kahn building so creatively within her installation. When the works of art could withstand the light, Denise brought them to life really through the installation that she made. And one more slide I think I have. Yeah, and so Denise not only reimagined how the Asian objects would look in these galleries, but also more importantly, she expanded the reinstallation to many, many more objects. And so what that has brought us over the years is renewed interest by faculty and students who use the Asian collection deeply for teaching and for their research. And she's introduced hundreds of thousands of public visitors each year to the breadth of the Asian holdings, which really couldn't happen at the same scale before this reinstallation. So I'm thrilled to work with Denise and want to turn it over to her now. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. I think you've enticed us all to get over to Yale. And Denise, can you tell us a little bit about the Asian collection specifically at the Yale University Art Gallery, its relative strengths, some of its masterpieces, and how important Asian art is to the Yale community?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm very happy to do that. Thank you, Stephanie, for your extraordinarily kind words. This is a view of the galleries as we reopened in 2017. And as Stephanie said, I learned to live with the light that comes from the glass in the Kahn building. Like most of us who've worked in museums for a long time, you do have this instinct to have everything in front of a plain wall. So it took a lot of thinking. The Asian collection is writ large at Yale. I think because we are so old, Asian was defined as broadly as possible. Under the rubric of Asian collection, we have the West Asian or Islamic collections, the Central Asian collections, the South Asian or Indian collections, the mainland Southeast Asia collections, the Himalayan collections, China, Korea, and Japan. We have important holdings from all of these cultures, and like all museum collections, things where I think we should grow. I would say that Chinese ceramics from the 10th to the 12th century and related pieces from the Islamic world are among our strengths, as well as some very, very important paintings from throughout all of Asia. And now, of course, we have a great Surimono collection to play with. May I have the next slide, please? We took the opportunity, basically, the galleries are divided by not so light sensitive and very, very light sensitive, and we change the paintings and the textiles in the light sensitive areas every 6 months. Next slide, please. And I use this as an opportunity, or we use this as an opportunity to explore different topics, and also sometimes to tweak rotations to accommodate a major symposium in something like Islamic art or a course that's going on. So I'm going to leave you with this slide for now, but this is basically what the East Asian painting section looked like when we reopened. In the front, we have the beginning of a 3-part calligraphy series curated by a Yale alumni and using his collection. A 3-part series exploring the development of Chinese calligraphy. And as you move into Japan, and a wonderful screen by Mayo Motoko, we're looking at the role of line in Japanese culture as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. I might also point out the Sujimura vase in the background. Yale has made a commitment to contemporary ceramics that goes back quite a ways. I'm really pioneering in that respect. So it's wonderful to see even a piece juxtaposed against something else within the context of traditional Asian art. So my hat's off to you. My next question is, we're going to move into the world of Surimono, is for Sadako. Can you tell this audience, not everyone is a Surimono aficionado yet, hopefully they'll become so. Can you tell us how they're created and for whom they're created, and what sets them apart from traditional ukiyo-e?
Okay. Surimono literally means printed things, but despite this very modest name, there's nothing modest about Surimono. Surimono are, in fact, intricately made, privately commissioned woodblock prints with gorgeous imagery and puzzling poems called kyoka. Surimono comes out of a collaboration among the poet, the artist, namely the image designer, the calligrapher, the woodblock carver, and the printmaker. It illustrates a highly nuanced and personal interplay between word and image. Here, in addition to the visual display of the fashionable, gorgeous kimono design of 1820s, Edo, present-day Tokyo, this image reveals to us that the woman is Sei Shonagon, the famous essayist of the pillow book, or the Makura no Soshi. She is portrayed rolling up the bamboo blind to view the snow outdoors, alluding to her knowledge of the famous Chinese poetic line by Bai Zhui, "How should we view the snow on Mount Xianlu?" The viewers of the first half of the 19th century, when Surimono were popular, most likely could identify this image as Ryobei or Ryubi, from one of the heroes in the immensely popular Chinese novel called Romance of the Three Kingdoms, or Sangokshi. Chinese themes are very popular at this time in Edo, with the growth of interest in Confucian thoughts and classical literature. Please also observe the printer's use of rich mineral pigments and the artist's clear attempt at evoking a Chinese mood. Next, please. Visual puns and clever image play were also a hallmark of Surimono. This enigmatic still life, for example, serves as a lunar calendar or egoyomi, as the pink envelope at the lower left records the numbers of the long months, meaning 30 days per month in 1816. There's 4 complex characters at the central column. In fact, that the first 2 characters also tell us the name of the group, poetry group, Yomogawa, or 4 Directions group. This complex image clearly indicates the artist's curiosity with reflected images, as the porcelain bowl is reflected in the shiny black lacquer pillow stand. I must add here, still life as a subject was first launched in the genre of Surimono. In the 19th century, still life imagery had not yet to enter into the world of better known commercially produced ukiyo-e prints. As Surimono were produced in extremely small print runs and commissioned by exclusive audiences, the lavish use of costly metallic pigments such as gold, silver, brass, copper, and zinc became pervasive. Highly sophisticated and time-consuming printing techniques were also used on Surimono surfaces, such as polishing black lacquer with a boar's tusk to make it shine, as seen here on the black mirror stand. A special gaufrage called karazuri features elaborate embossing and debossing without any color or ink, making the best use of the thick and fiber-rich mulberry paper, as seen on the cat's fur. Here the cat is shown frightened by its own reflection, but in Surimono, nothing is as simple as it seems. Indeed, her red tie-dye color, the color of a courtesan's undergarments, might lead the viewer to believe the animal represents a courtesan at her makeup table. Unlike most Surimono, which were created in Edo, this print was made in the Western region and in and around Osaka, where the artist Gakuti worked for a period of time. Surimono's subject matter varies greatly. They include portraits of kabuki actors, the creatures of the seashore, birds, fish, and butterflies that illustrate the current popularity of the observing nature with some degree of scientific interest. The most pervasive subject matter for Surimono may be, and we're talking about on the left, the 12 animals of the zodiac, as Surimono were largely issued for the new year. It was highly important in such a commissioned print to make reference to that zodiac animal. Here the ox, the second of the 12, is designed by Kunisada, who is an artist known for his ukiyo-e prints depicting kabuki actors. The round red circle contains the artist's name, but it also serves an additional role representing the first rising sun in the new year. Typically, ukiyo-e artists were commissioned to make Surimono. Among them, we have Hokkei, Hokusai, and Shuman. Hokusai, world famous for his 1830s print of the Great Wave, in his earlier years, was an incredibly sought after Surimono artist. Here, no, you have to go back. Okay, we're talking about the one on the right. Here in this print, I was impressed by Hokusai's artistic sensitivity toward the precious time of childhood before flying into adult life. The Drosten and Kenadjian collection and the accompanying catalog features many works by these 3 artists, as well as Yashima Gakuti and other prominent pupils of Hokusai, and many members of the Utagawa school, leaders of the ukiyo-e kabuki prints. Surimono, dating between the late 1810s and 1830s, represent the height of Surimono production in both visual finesse and poetic intricacy. They present vignettes of the arts and culture of the time. But Surimono production began to decline after 1830 due to the deaths of a few of the leaders of this genre, and more directly due to the economic impact of the tempo famine that devastated the publishing industry. So Surimono represents Japan's last pre-modern literary and artistic burst before the arrival of the West and the forced modernity that followed in the Meiji era.
Thank you, Sadako. It's amazing what you compressed and how much information you put into those 6 minutes. Thank you very much. There's so much to know, and the examples you picked are absolutely glorious. The audience should be aware of, I don't know what size screen they're looking at, but these prints are only about 7.25 inches by 7.75 inches. So the quality of the printing is outstanding when you hold them in their hand versus seeing it on the screens. So next, I'd like to turn our attention to Adam and his relationship, his proclivity as a scholar of poetry. Can you tell us a little bit about the poetry clubs, which were the major commissioners of these rare works, and how, when, and why Surimono were collected in Japan? Why were they produced, and for what purpose did they serve?
Thank you, Joan. Yes, so although the images themselves are, I think, a type of visual poetry, as you mentioned, Surimono also, as a rule, contain actual poems. These were most often kyoka, or wild poems, which could be the more, I guess, typical of Japanese poetry, waka, which are 31 syllables and 5 lines, or the more familiar to Westerners, haiku of 17 syllables and 3 lines. But they were considered wild or unbound because, unlike conventional Japanese poetry, which built upon long-established topics and long-established language, stretching back over 1,000 years, actually the earliest printed material in the Japanese language is a compilation of poetry. A kyoka might address a familiar theme with a strikingly unfamiliar metaphor, or it might adapt familiar language to a funny or surprising topic. And the poems, usually 1 or 2, but as we can see on this Hokusai print, sometimes a lot more. I think the record for this collection is 27 on 1 print, are selected as sort of notable relics of a group poetry contest or a group gathering with some spontaneous poetry in these sort of kyokai, or sort of wild parties. Or sometimes the poems were solicited as guest contributions, and you can see sort of upside down, but on the far left of this image, there is a little insignia, so marking a guest contributor. I believe it's Yomogawa no Uta Gaki no Magao. And so the poems themselves speak to the origins of the Surimono, which are tokens of the social life behind the prints. And the poetry in this collection ranges from sorry, there's a bit of road noise, from the encouragements you see here, written on the occasion of the actor Bando Mitsugoro's premiere of 2 new plays in Kyoto and Osaka, encouragements to for him to show the audiences down south the charms of an Edo actor and not get too comfortable and come back home soon. And they all sort of play on the charms of different scenes of famous sites in Edo, the snow in Musashino, the moon over the Sumida River, and the flowers in spring. To the muted poems on the next slide, next image. These muted poems of memorial on this subtle print by Kitsu in commemoration of a deceased friend and father, in which priests and his son and various friends from his poetry group gather on the Memorial Day after his death to offer these poems to him in the next world. To enticements, to visit a particular sweet shop while out viewing plum blossoms, and this print on the next slide of congratulations on the birth of an actor's son. You can see the father's poem at the top, very excited, very quick hand, but also very orderly hand, and all of the symbolism of a young child born in a monkey year. You see the monkey mask. There's also a hidden, the sort of bamboo, which is hung with gold coins, are actually a sort of hidden calendar. And it celebrates the birth of his son, a son who, in a print that appears later in this slideshow, writes his own poem on the occasion of his first performance carrying on the family trade. And I should note just in closing that while there's usually something of a flirtation between the poems and the picture, the two are not wedded. And so they're not always necessarily closely related or mutually descriptive. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. I've always found the kabuki surimono to be the trickiest to figure out, and you're a wizard at it. And my hat's off to you. Really complicated imagery, more so than even the still lifes. My next question is actually for myself. There we go. I just wanted to give the audience a little context for collecting surimono, particularly in America, and publications that have been done on them in English. America has really been a pioneer in this respect. One of the most well-known, and maybe for still life subjects, the most glorious collection is in 3 albums that are owned by the Metropolitan Museum of Art that were put together by a dealer in Japan and Paris, Hayashi Tadamasa, and acquired by the Havemeyers, who gave it to the Met, which contains over 500 surimono. And fortunately, these albums, which are beautifully designed and put together, remain intact. But that gives you an idea of how early surimono were collected in this country and treasured by Americans who couldn't read a word of what they were looking at. Next slide. This has fostered a actually good library on the subject, most especially promoted by Roger Keyes, one of the greatest scholars on ukiyo-e in any language, with publications that have gone on for many decades that we all of us who are specialists rely upon with great regularity. Next slide. More recently, the publication that I did with John Carpenter on Frank Lloyd Wright's collection of surimono that I alluded to earlier, and 2 publications done by Cornell University on 2 collections by women collectors that in part are now part of the Herbert F. Johnson collection and scholarship. And then I have to bring it to the parties here. You see a picture from Shawan Drosten in 2000 when we were there for the Ota Kinen Bijitsukan exhibition on surimono. In order to do a show on surimono in Japan, the loans had to come from outside because the surimono had long left Japan in before the 1880s. Reproductions were made. And even in that album we just saw from the Met, one of those prints is actually a facsimile. So in 1889, when those albums were put together, there still weren't enough surimono to fill those albums. And museums in Japan have still to this day a paucity within their holdings. So I was asked to curate this exhibition with surimono from Shawan, from Joanna Schoaf, whose catalog we just saw, and from Barbara Bowman's collection, which is now part of the Los Angeles County Museum, thanks to her philanthropy. And down below, I just wanted to throw in one of Shawan's earliest acquisitions. When we were living in Paris, I found it in Paris, a very rare surimono by Utagawa Hiroshige. Like Hokusai, who is better known for his landscapes, early in his career did a few surimono. Next slide. I also want to point out Patrick and Sean, besides being great clients and great friends, are profoundly insightful collectors, because they will acquire surimono like a curator would that are unusual, off the beaten track, not famous, and by artists that are not even well known within the ukiyo-e genre. For instance, Tani Bunsho, who is best known as a painter, and you can see his works in our next talk, as in the Feinberg collection, and well represented as a painter in the Feinberg collection. He too did receive the occasional commission for a surimono. Or in the case of Utagawa Kuninao on the left, who's also an Utagawa school kabuki artist, here he's doing a no mask. And I believe to this date, this is the only known genuine impression of the surimono. It's very well known by 1890s reproductions and facsimiles, but finding this real one, even though the condition isn't quite up to Sean and Patrick's standard, its uniqueness made it a must-have for the 2 of them. Next slide. Okay, now I would like to turn the table onto the collector herself. Shawan, since I met you in the mid-1970s, can you tell me, as a collector today, what is the allure for you of the Surimono genre, and tell us how you became seduced by their beauty and their rarity? Are you there?
Joan, yes, we're here.
Okay, you're there. Okay, great.
Joan, this is an embarrassing moment for me because I have to admit to the world that my original collecting motive was entirely mercenary. Back in the 1970s, I concocted this plan without my husband's knowing that I was going to buy a couple of Japanese prints per year, store them under the bed, and sell them when we retired. I would surprise Patrick with an addition to our retirement funds. He would be happy and we would sail off financially secure into the retirement sunset. Why did I fixate on Japanese prints? That was because, one, they were small. We lived in a one-bedroom apartment. Two, they were almost affordable. I was still a graduate student at the time. Three, I was already fond of Asian art. The seed for this appreciation of Asian art may have been planted when I was a teenager and selected a blue pseudo-Chinese bird and flower wallpaper for my bedroom, and I loved that paper. But perhaps most importantly, the opportunity to buy Japanese prints dropped into my lap when I met this beautiful unknown art dealer, Joan Mirviss, in Paris when we both lived there. But then Joan pulled a fast one on me. She showed me prints that a type of Japanese print that I didn't expect at all. It didn't look anything like what I had anticipated. She showed me, next slide please. She showed me a Gakute Surimono. This is of a scholar's alcove. And I found it charming, intimate. It was art meant to be held in the hand. And even to my uneducated eye, the technical quality was superb. So I snapped it up in 1979, my first purchase. The fact that I couldn't read the calligraphy didn't faze me in the least because I was just buying for investment. The need to protect Surimono from light because of these sensitive colors and the paper support also didn't deter me because I wasn't going to frame them and display them. Storing them to preserve their condition was part of my strategy. So that was my big investment plan. Then somehow along the way, Surimono began to exert their own magic, and the mercenary motives dropped away, and a passion for Surimono was ignited. The more we learned, the more we wanted to learn. As any collector knows, learning about another time or place, another culture is one of the great pleasures of collecting. Then sometime in the 1990s, our accumulation of Surimono turned into a collection of Surimono, a collection that told a story. And I was definitely thinking in terms of a study collection by about 2003 when we purchased two 1820s prints along with their 1890s reproductions. What better way of honing our or a future scholar's connoisseurship than with a side-by-side comparison. So our collection grew and grew, and it's increased in value, but my pitiful retirement plan has come to naught, because how can we sell 40 years worth of collecting and disperse these prints to the winds? So our solution is to send all of our Surimono children to Yale.
On a full scholarship, I might add. I'd also like to add something in case it is not abundantly clear by now, which is how important it is when you're collecting to have a trusted and knowledgeable advisor. The need is most obvious at the very beginning, where you know so little about the area and so little about the market, but in fact, it never really abates. You're just asking more probing and informed questions. And when you arrive at the point Shawan just described, that an accumulation has become a collection, then suddenly there is someone else in the room, the collection. And the question is no longer, do we like this? But what about the collection? Does it need this? Of course, the answer in our case was always yes. Our guide through all of this, the knowledgeable person whom we entrusted implicitly, was, of course, Joan, and she has answered numerous questions, in fact, innumerable questions over the years, and we couldn't have done it without you, Joan. Thank you.
That's embarrassing, but thank you. It's been a team effort. No dealer, we're only as good as our clients, and our clients' ability to listen and to look and to learn. And that has made for a joyful team effort that is incredibly gratifying, that the collection is not to be broken up. And I'm sure there are collectors on this call today who would gladly offer, write out a big check to just go buy all of these things and add them to their collections. But that this will be left to Yale, and that Yale will be able to learn, study, and display and research. And that's incredibly gratifying. I have to thank you. So let me turn back to Denise, one of the custodians of this collection. And Denise, how would you put this collection within the context of the Asian collection that you already have told us a lot about? How does it work?
Well,
and how will it work?
It will work very well. It is an extraordinary acquisition. So or an extraordinary gift, sorry, wrong word. So thank you. Yale teaches in many, many different ways. We teach in the galleries, we teach in classrooms in the galleries, and we also have an extraordinary state-of-the-art storage display classroom area at Yale West Campus. We bring students to all of these places and work with any number of classes, including things you wouldn't expect, like the sociology of religion or forestry. One of our audiences is, in fact, the K through 12 crowd in the region. So this is a class from that group in an exhibition Sadako curated, exploring the issue of moon and bamboo, which is shown in a Japanese lens here, but the interstices between these two is a very East Asian theme. And we get, I would say, approximately 16,000 school children every year coming to our galleries and our Asian collection. May I have the next slide, please? We also, as I mentioned, work with events at Yale, so symposia on Islamic art, symposia on periods in China. The two slides on the screen that I'm showing you at the moment are from something that focused on a rare album in the Beinecke collection. It's something called the Tekagami Jo. It dates to around 1670, and it is the first example of a Japanese tradition of assembling bits and pieces from earlier traditions and turning them into albums, or in the case of one of the things in our collection, a screen. This was actually a project initiated by Mimi Ying Pruksawan in the art history department and Ed Kamens in literature, and we worked on the didactics, the labels, for this exhibition with a group of graduate students. The students wrote the labels, and they also gave talks in the exhibition. May I have the next screen, please? And of course, our wonderful Surimono are an extraordinary opportunity to introduce people to a beautiful and fascinating art form, but also really to tell some different stories. So we have makers at Yale. We have an art school. They fuss about surfaces all the time. They've already been in Surimono fussing. I've also had some of the students from the performing arts crowd come in, because theater today, 20th century American theater, is truly multilateral, and so they look at staging in kabuki and in bugaku and in things like that, and the prints are very, very interesting to these people. We have what I think of for the Surimono and its future use, kind of a certain amount of what's basically obvious or low-hanging fruit: Japanese art history, Japanese history, Japanese literature, and I know that Adam has already used some of the Surimono from this collection as a means of helping students learn how to grapple with the joys of translating classical Japanese. But there are many, many things in these very knowledgeable or knowledge-based prints that can go elsewhere at Yale. So to give you a few examples, may I have the next screen, please? This is Gakute, who I've developed a deep fondness for over the last couple of years. And this is a scene from The Water Margin. So The Water Margin is a 14th century Chinese novel based on a series of 12th century events. It became very, very popular as one of the sort of four great classics of Chinese vernacular literature in the late 16th and early 17th century, largely because of accessibility due to the rise of book printing and bookmaking in China at the time. It was translated into Japanese in the, in the mid-18th century. I'm sorry, I don't remember, but it was translated into Japanese just in time to become part of the story of ukiyo-e generally. And of course, it's well known in American literature because of Pearl Buck's translation in 1933. May I have the next slide, please? One of the things that's just happening right now at Yale is a re-emphasis on Buddhist studies as something that Yale can offer to undergraduates and graduate students. And within the Surimono story, we have representations of these very interesting East Asian-based figures that are not entirely canonical Buddhist figures. Budai, or as he's known in Japanese, Hotei, who is a quasi-historical Chinese monk who lived in the 8th century and then became an avatar of the Buddha Maitreya, and then ultimately a popular figure throughout East Asia, or even Daruma, whose Sanskrit name is Bodhidharma, who is an extremely enigmatic, presumably South Indian figure who came to South China somehow, and is of course now seen as the founder of the Chan or Zen tradition of Buddhism. And even moving more broadly afield, may I have the last slide, please? This fascinated me because of the glass. So as art history, as many of you know, I'm sure, is redefining itself at Yale and thinking about how to talk more globally or more broadly, one of the things that comes up is what moves from one point in the world to another point in the world. It's very easy if you're an East Asianist to think immediately of porcelain and lacquer, which are two East Asian traditions that moved west. Glass is a very, very different story. Glass is a technology that moved from west to east. And this fascinated me because I wondered why he was painting on glass, where the glass came from. He's theoretically a Chinese artist, and if this is a reference to the reverse glass painting, which is a European tradition that then became part of China trade. There's also a great interest right now in film studies and anime, all of which can link back to ukiyo-e broadly and Surimono more specifically. And I'm very aware that once you have an extraordinary resource, its presence in your community grows and grows and grows. And so I'm absolutely certain that 5 years from now, all of these wonderful Surimono will have shown up in so many different places in Yale and in so many different ways. And I look forward to seeing what happens. And I deeply thank Patrick and Shawan for their generosity. So thank you.
Well, very ambitious and very exciting to hear about Surimono being used outside the context of art history and stimulating a whole new audience for them and new scholarship on a whole new plane. Thank you, Denise. Sadako, can I turn the table back to you and ask you specifically within this collection of over 300 Surimono, what are some of the more important or more startling pieces that you found? What makes this collection particularly unique amongst the other collections that I briefly mentioned? And what are the strengths of this collection? A small question.
Sure. I think you've already talked about, but first of all, the Drosten Kenadjian collection is noted for its high quality and great condition and comprehensive subject matter. And it's, furthermore, it includes some very unusual and complicated works that ideal fit for educational institution like Yale. And here, this is one of the most spectacular series in the collection and was designed by Kubo Schumann. And Schumann was noted for its love of nature and his remarkable array of carefully gradated, delicate colors. Please observe his range of colors. There's, the golden yellow to velvety black to blue-gray to, splendid tones of silky white to, icy blue. Anyway, it's really a beautiful coloring. There are only 8 designs known from this spectacular series, and this collection has 7 of them. All its beautiful condition and once owned by the celebrated Parisian collector, Henri Viver. Unlike other artists, Schumann seems to have had his own atelier where he not only designed prints, but also carved the woodblocks and even printed them for both himself and other artists. The accompanying kyokai, the poems, explain that the butterflies are intended to evoke images of the courtesans frolicking in New Year celebration and at work in the pleasure quarters. Next one, please. These 2 remaining images, the 2 of the 7, illustrate mostly moths. It is clear that the artist was spending time observing nature and portraying it with an attention to accuracy that was prevalent in the arts of the time. Next. This is another gorgeous series entitled The 6 Immortal Samurai Poets. The set is one of the masterpieces of the era, demonstrating both the artist's brilliance combined with the kyoka poets' sentiments toward and their insights into samurai culture. Issued circa 1827, these lavishly produced prints were created during a time of domestic peace, when former samurai turned to other professions. So the poems may be read as nostalgic and at times having satiric twists. Here in these noble portraits, we can see the extreme attention to detail and elaborate printing techniques such as deep karazuri coffrage without coloring. Each figure is placed against thick brass ground resembling gold. The collection holds 2 versions of this Surimono of the 6th poet, Taira no Tadanori. However, each impression has a different poem. As so few impressions were pulled for these costly commissions, the blocks remained in fine state at the end of a run. Since the poems were carved in separate blocks, the blocks for the image could be reused for another patron. It is interesting to speculate which impression is the first. The left-hand side print appears to be later printing, judging from the background printing, but the style of the calligraphy is close to the others in the set. So the pair provides excellent study material for future research. Another treasure in the collection is this banquet scene at the Sagamiya restaurant in the eastern hills of Kyoto, created on the largest washi sheet of paper then available, sized about 16 by 21 inches. Attendees at this party include kabuki players, their patrons, and courtesans, each of whom wrote a haiku poem to commemorate this auspicious occasion. Another unusual aspect of this work is that this was made in the Kyoto and Osaka area rather than in Edo. Landscapes are rather unusual in the genre of Surimono. This work, made circa 1820, shows the 3 celebrated scenic spots in Japan. From the top, Itsukushima Shrine, Amano Hashidate or Bridge to Heaven, and Matsushima, or Pine Islands. The artist Utagawa Toyohiro was a teacher of the famous Hiroshige, who created the 53 stations of the Tokaido Road. Toyohiro produced a lovely body of Surimono prints, in addition to his better-known bijinga, or paintings of the beauties. Lastly, I would like to show this very unusual work by an unidentified artist, signed Senryu. This is among the few that have been included in the catalog representing unknown artists worthy to be explored. It is most likely made circa 1840, and it bears haiku rather than the more pervasive waka form in 31 syllables. The below are percussion instruments and a cushion covered with cloth in imported textiles originated in China, South and Southeast Asia. Despite the fact that Japan was officially closed to the outside world throughout most of the Edo period, knowledge of foreign cultures and products did sneak in. We find many surprises like this in the collection. Thank you.
Thank you, Sadako. Again, illuminating and so many different points of view from this collection that we can study forever. So I'd like to ask you and Adam separately, since you're so familiar with the 300 prints in this collection, what are the special discoveries or the surprises that you found within them that you didn't anticipate finding?
Sure. I have to tell you my eureka moment. Soma ware, or somayaki by Hokusai, was one of the most puzzling surimono in the collection. I immediately liked it very much because of its delicate coloring of light blue, indigo, yellow, tan, brown, black, silver, and gold, and enigmatic composition. The tea-ball in the background is decorated with a typical horse sign produced in the town of Soma in northern Japan, giving the print its source for the title. The poem says, "Just when it is warm enough for grasses to sprout up and green shows through light snow, it's time for Hatsumukashi tea." I was completely puzzled, for this crazy poem related to the printed image. No other scholars had yet unearthed the relationship between the image and the poem. Hatsumukashi tea, meaning the first tea taste of the old, is in fact the name brand of a powdered green tea used for wabi tea gatherings. It is still available today and known for its rich aroma. However, when examining the work, neither the kettle with spout nor the large jar with the top knot are actually used in the preparation of wabi tea. After contemplating this puzzle for a few days and nights, on 3 o'clock one morning, the answer dawned on me. The assembled objects are connected with the Japanese verb pronounced kakeru. That has many, many meanings and many, maybe written with many kanji characters, all homophones. For example, we place kakeru, tea kettle on fire. Place kakeru, a cloth over something. Horses run, kakeru. Clouds and birds fly fast, kakeru. Apply glazing, kakeru, over a ceramic body. And kakeru can even mean to cross over something, as seen here in the crossed chopsticks, and so on. I'm certain that the 19th century poets enjoy such puzzling plays of words and competed for ever more creative associations. In this Surimono, Hokusai is experimenting with these homophones by visually uniting mismatched implements that do not belong to one another. It was Hokusai's trial of using the old existing words to make a fresh taste, just like the Hatsumukashi tea, the first tea taste of the old. Next one, please. Another important aspect of this Surimono collection are the numerous images which illustrate foreign influences on the Japanese art and culture during the Edo period of forced isolation. Clearly, there was a market in Japan for foreign items secretly flowing into Japan. And these items were adapted for Japanese taste and use. Now, Japanese sweets, wagashi, are made of grain, beans, agar, vegetable gelatin, and various kinds of sugar. And the right-hand side shows them presented on raised lacquer tray. The well-known poet Shindate Manzo II, whose poem is at the far left, the position of honor on the Surimono, is believed to have been a confectioner by trade. That makes perfect sense for this true-to-life presentation of the sweets, from the debossed orange-like sweets to the sugar-coated ones on the left. I was shocked to find out how much Japanese paid with costly silver and copper ores for the importation of sugar, cane sugar, in the early 18th century, until it began domestic production later in that century. In the Surimono on the left, the restrictions of trade since 1630s under the strict rule of closed-door policy are even more flaunted in the choice of imagery. Here, the traditional moist bean cakes called yokan, seen in 2 different tones of browns, are paired with Portuguese-style dried sweets called aruhei, derived from the Portuguese alufeira. The 3-dimensional faceted surface of the glass bowl is masterfully depicted here by the karazuri, or colorless, debossing technique, suggesting a delicate translucency. This type of cut glass is called gyaman in Japanese, derived from the Portuguese diamante, or diamond in English. So it is clear that foreign items were treasured and explored.
Thank you, Sadako. We've learned a lot about the diversity of taste among the cognoscenti who commissioned the Surimono at the time, and their diversity of aesthetic sensibility. So I'd like to ask Adam the same question, and I'm sure his taste is completely different, and I want to see what he's going to tantalize us with. Please, Adam.
Thanks, Joan. I have two prints to briefly introduce. This first Toyokuni print not only bears an accurate architectural likeness to the Ichimuraza, which was a theater that existed from the 1600s until it burned down in 1932 and wasn't rebuilt. But it is in fact the first and also the only print I've seen so far that has a sort of manipulable pop-up sort of effect with the curtain, which, as you can see here on the upper left, this is the print if you just see it and don't touch it. And then as you sort of move clockwise, you can see this curtain actually lifts up and rises on a scene of 3 actors in character for the play, I think, 3 famous warriors meeting on the high road. Don't hold me to that title, something very close to that though. And so the straps holding it up as well, you see on the upper left, the straps holding up the curtain are actually a cryptic calendar, and they enumerate the long and short months for the year in which it was printed in 1822. And you can see at the very upper left of the picture of the print, a faintly inscribed poem by Edo no Hananari, the Flower of Edo, who was in fact the daimyo of the Choshu province by the name of Mori Narimoto. And Choshu, of course, was a place of enduring but quiet resistance to the shogunate, the shogun Tokugawa in Edo, based in Edo. And so this print serves to highlight the social mixing that actors' patronage clubs allowed at a time when actors were technically legal non-persons. And I mean, there was a caste system, but they weren't even on the bottom rung of the ladder. They were entirely off of it. Yet they met with some of the richest merchants and the most highly placed samurai in the country. And one can only wonder, thinking of this print and it's the daimyo and where he was from, what sort of connections he would be making while ostensibly patronizing the theater in Edo. And on the next slide, of course, I was drawn to this print as soon as I saw it. I mean, it's a massive lobster with the little baby turtle coming up behind it. Not only that, but it's also a visual pun, a boat, meant to be placed under one's pillow. This print is you typically place under one's pillow the night before the new year for it to sail into your dreams and bring good fortune for the following year. The standard sort of boat print had a standard poem that went with it, and it usually depicted on a sort of Chinese treasure boat, the seven gods of fortune. But here it's adapted with symbols to suit the actor Don Drudo, the seventh. There are the carp, which are also referenced in the one of the poems on the other print we showed earlier about his son being born. I'll pause again for background noise. There are the two sort of felicitous colors of peony, the red and the white. And they're the two sort of lucky bats sort of at the upper left vertex of the square. The square itself, of course, is not only the actor's family crest, but it's also the mast of this ship, which the lobster forms the sort of whole of. And so the turtle down below has its shell formed by the Chinese character kotobuki, or ju in Japanese for long life. And the poem above is a sort of incantation composed specially for the occasion of one of these boat prints. And its poems, its syllables actually read the same, exactly the same backwards and forwards, making it a long poetic palindrome. And I have to say my sort of eureka moment was my work process for these poems was quite enjoyable, because I would decide which poems I wanted to translate that day, and I would write them down several times, try to get it in my head and think about all of the punning and the play. And at some point I just looked at what I had written down, and this is after I've been working on it for about a week, and saw that, of course, it read the same backwards and forwards. And it seemed one of those things that seemed so obvious in retrospect. Then, of course, I found out that McKee had written, actually published an article about it later, but I have to say, independently derived the sort of the palindrome. And I can see if I can remember the poem from memory. I think up top it's celebrating the actor's son reaching the age. The earlier print he was born, and now the son is finally able to take the stage for the first time. And the poem along the top reads, I went to ask the young sprout of long famed generations what day it would be that he would finally burst with vigor into flower. Of course, referring to his flowering performance on the stage. And along the left is the son's reply, a haiku, a three-line poem, very short. Hey dad, can I give it a go? This time the curtain calls for me. And so with just this one print, I think it shows just the richness that you can find and the depth of one Surimono. Mm-hmm. What is the value of this? One of the values of this collection for Yale, being a research institution and placed before, although now because of various contingencies, not able to be worked on directly by students in the years and decades to come. How could they be used? And I can say even before the book was out, I was using Surimono from this collection in classes. The poems, as you can see several poems, you can see one more here on the right. The poems serve as sort of grist for practicing one's skill, transcribing calligraphy in sort of motivating, enjoyable small amounts. And then the decipher poem in turn sort of provides the material to exercise one's grasp of literary Japanese when translating these into English, because literary Japanese, of course, differs from modern Japanese. And one of my students, in fact, whom I believe is watching now, took on the whole series of 12 calendar prints that these two are drawn from as his final project for one of these classes. And he transcribed and translated them all. And he did a very good job, Ryan. Yo ganbatta. And from there, from the translations, you could go on to trace using online databases, the poetic allusions within the poems themselves. Many of the poems have classical Chinese, as you can see here on the left with Guan Yu, or prefaces in classical Chinese. And so, that can be used for practice as well. And even in terms of visual material, for lectures, I have shown enlarged details of the impressions to illustrate not only how woodblock prints are made, but to distinguish between different levels of craftsmanship and labor and different types of technique. And so the value of this collection as a training tool, I think, is very high. And this is not even to mention the type of close research and investigation involved in writing the book, which of course Sadako and I could only lend to a fraction of the overall collection. So I think there's quite a bit of funny, charming, and serious scholarship and poetry yet to be written come out of this collection.
Thank you, Adam. As someone who is not even quasi-literate in Japanese, it's illuminating to hear the depth of what's available to people who are trying to link imagery to calligraphy and the poetry to contemporary times. And this set is an amazing set of 12. My hat's off to Ryan. Pretty daunting task for a student to tackle. And the entry in the book is excellent. So accolades to both of you. Next, I'd like to turn back to Shawan and Patrick, if I may. And actually, as collectors, and there are a lot of collectors in the audience here tonight, how do you pick your favorite children from your family? But could you please do that for us from all these babies? If you had to run out of a burning building, what would you grab first? Shawan?
Well, you've already glimpsed a few of our favorites on the screen, especially that spectacular Gakute birdcage. But there are a few more that we would definitely grab from that hypothetical fire, such as this Kubo Shunman 2 bullfinches on a cherry tree branch, which thrills me in part because of the wonderful condition it is. That's not always easy to find in a Surimono. I admire the printer's skill in shading the bird's rosy breast down to that beigey pink color. I appreciate the restraint Kubo Shunman showed in depicting the cherry blossoms only in barely visible gaufrage instead of in color or outlining them, because it creates an airier composition. And I also really like that loose flowing calligraphy. Doesn't it look like it might be the transcription of trilling bird song? Mm-hmm. And maybe the image also triggers a memory of that childhood wallpaper. But it was only in reading Sadako's essay on this print in the catalog that I learned that this tranquil scene may have a secondary and somewhat darker meaning. Imagery in Surimono is not always as straightforward as it seems upon first glance. Right. Next slide, please. Then I've also chosen another Kubo Shunman called White from the series of 5 colors of tea utensils. Again, the superb condition of this Surimono is one that makes any collector's heart sing. Not lost to the ravages of time is that gradual color change in the background from a olive green to the beigey background paper color. I like the neutral colors and the way the textures have been shown, the stone of the tea mill and the tin of the tea caddy. And then the artist also seems to be playing with the concept of roundness with all the round tea utensils he has gathered here. Even the crank, that cylindrical crank there in the front, will crank in a circular motion. Further emphasizing the roundness of the objects is that curtain of calligraphy at the top, leaving voids, rounded voids above the tea mill and the tea storage jar. To me, this print is that serene as the tea ceremony itself. I love it. Next one, please. And then there is the tiger stick. This is a humble little Surimono, one of my first purchases. It bears the simple, almost stark images of a ink stick, an ink brush, and an ink stone. There's no poem, there's no artist signature here. It is essentially an advertisement for either a brush maker or perhaps a literary supplies store. But if you look closely, you can see that it was very skillfully printed with gaufrage, and metallic inks on the ink stick, and graduated colors on the ink stone and on the brush. The best guess is this print was commissioned perhaps as a traditional New Year's gift to be presented to the shop's customers in appreciation of their patronage. But I like to imagine a backstory to the print, that it was saved by the proud parents or children of the shop owner, and that it was preserved for over 200 years by a chain of owners who kept it from harm. So for me, this Surimono is a mascot of our collection, because Patrick and I see ourselves as just temporary custodians of these prints. Now it is the Yale Art Gallery's turn. May the gallery be as conscientious a custodian as those imagined parents or children were.
Next, yes. And now the boys' favorite, right? Kunisada's Ichikawa Danjuro VII as Daruma. Perhaps, at least at first glance, the least Surimono-like print in our collection. So much of what we've been discussing tonight doesn't seem to apply. What delicate work between the artist's drawing and the woodblock print carver. Is there really anything mysterious about the meaning here? In fact, you might even ask, is this even a woodblock print? Doesn't it look so much more like a sumie ink painting with the brush freshly dipped in black ink outlining the cowl and the robe? But of course, it is a Surimono print, and a pretty much in-your-face one, representing the famous actor Danjuro VII, and about to do one of those absolutely wonderful things that kabuki stars do, which is screw up their faces and then stare cross-eyed at the audience. And the audience goes wild. And when we lived in Japan, we also went wild at this when we saw not Danjuro VII, but his then successor, Danjuro XII, do exactly that. Now, of course, it is a Surimono, which means there's a lot more going on in there than meets the untrained eye. But since I don't want to keep you here all night, I will just suggest that you go look at the catalog and see what Adam has to say about that. Thank you.
Terrific, Patrick. We share many passions, including this glorious Surimono. And thank you, Shawan. But I want to ask you another question, which is even more relevant. Why Yale? Why did you decide to endow Yale with these amazing treasures that you have carefully and seriously acquired over 4 decades, and choose to give this to this academic nested museum?
Well, there are really 3 reasons. Serendipity, considering the alternatives, and competence. On serendipity, I went to Yale undergraduate, graduated in 1970. This year would have been my 50th reunion. And I had a wonderful time there, and Yale has been on our charitable giving list from the beginning. Considering the alternatives, we had seen other collections which we had greatly admired, sold at auction at the death of the collectors. And it seemed to us that it was almost as if the collections had never existed. All that love, that attention, that scholarship going in it, and we decided we didn't want to have that happen to ours. And finally, competence. It seemed to us that Yale really was uniquely qualified not only to profit from the collection, but to use it in creative ways.
You know, first of all, the Yale Gallery already has a strong Asian art collection into which our Surimono nicely fit and hopefully complement. And all art benefits from having a strong context. Then a true appreciation of Surimono requires a knowledge across a multitude of disciplines, as you're learning here. Curators at an art gallery within the setting of a university, such as Yale, have access, if they need it, to expertise across an incredible range of academic departments. Deciphering Surimono is just as much of a collaborative effort as making them was. We were also hopeful that Yale professors, and not just art history professors, would find ways of incorporating our Surimono into their classroom instructions. And according to Adlin and Denise, this is already happening, and we are really thrilled with that. Lastly, with the opening of the West Campus, Yale offers state-of-the-art research, conservation, and storage facilities. I don't think Yale is going to be putting our Surimono back under that bed.
Well, thank you both, and we all thank you. And the other legacy that you've helped to nurture was the publication of this amazing book, and that will live long after us. And all the research that was done, and we're about to see a slide of that. It's a serious tome. It's not a small publication. And just quickly, Sean, how important was it to you to make sure that this book got published?
Well, let's start with Patrick.
Well, the catalog really was, for us, the main event, or one of the main events. Surimono being so fragile and light sensitive, they cannot really be shown to the public for very long or very often. And so very much of what we have learned about Surimono, other than what came through our interactions with you, came from the study of the catalogs you have mentioned. And so that we really wanted to add to that a catalog that would help bring out certain aspects of Surimono. And we had imagined was a catalog where the quality of the photography would be such that it would be almost as if you were holding the Surimono in your hand as you show it to the light and see the gaufrage and how you look at the metallic prints. We also were hoping for something that would give an intellectual background so that the reader today might have something like the aha moment, the Japanese have another expression for that, that the original patron had hoped to elicit in the recipients of the Surimono on a New Year's Day in the 1820s. And in that sense, I must say, Yale has surpassed our expectations.
And besides, as the shutdown of museums all over the world has only emphasized, the current beautiful, handsome display of our Surimono at Yale is only temporary. Documentation endures.
Thank you, guys. I couldn't agree with you more. And I'm very excited to think about what's going to come. And thank you very much for making sure this book is as beautiful and as indispensable as it is. It's a seductive item all by itself, the perfect embodiment of the genre of Surimono. As we are not looking at our screen share at the moment, but I think we can conclude with our last question, hopefully without it. I turn the microphone over to Sadako, and I just wanted her to sort of summarize how this miraculous relationship between Sean and Patrick and the collection developed, and how she managed to accomplish this amazing feat over this last decade.
Okay. So shall I, do you have an image?
Well, we're trying. You can speak anyway. Please go on ahead.
Okay. So I am not good with the improvising, so I'm just going to go with the script, but I have this in the photographs which I've taken in 2010. So this 2010 photograph marks the beginning of the close relationship between the collectors, Shawan and Patrick, and the Yale Art Gallery. A year earlier, I curated and installed, with the invaluable assistance of many colleagues at the Yale Gallery, a special exhibition on the tea culture of Japan, with the majority of loans coming from the Danziger collection. I invited Shawan to come see what Yale can do. He responded to my call in March and extended her US trip during the New York Asia Week to travel to New Haven. I believe she liked it very much. And in the lobby, we happened to meet our former director, Jock Reynolds, who was as friendly and welcoming as usual. Just 1 year later, I was invited by Shawan and Patrick to visit their home in the suburb of Frankfurt to make my initial research trip, when this photo was taken one warm June day. At that time, just 10 years ago, the Drosten Kenadjian collection included 200 works. Now it totals over 300 Surimono. Together, Shawan and I set up a table for photographing each of the prints using the excellent spring natural light. We shot all 200 in one day. Now, nearly 1 decade later, 70 works from the collection were selected to highlight and research, to be published as 60 entries for this book. This required myself, along with Adam, to work on over 200 poems and to examine their relationships to the specific image. It has been my great fortune to find Adam, and his contribution to this daunting project has been immeasurable. Thank you, Adam. We still have a long way to go to complete our research on this splendid collection, and this will surely be a rich opportunity for future scholarship at Yale. For me, this photo documents the inauguration of this ambitious project and reflects our mutual passion and drive to complete it. I must also express my gratitude for their patience as the renovation of the UAG in 2012 and 2017 kept pushing back the target date. But for the calamitous advent of COVID-19, the spring 2020 date would have been perfect. Thank you, Shawan and Patrick, for your trust in us at Yale. And thank you, Joan, for your usual timely advice. Once I recall you, Joan, saying, I think you and Shawan are a good match. Through this connection, Yale will be the proud recipient of a world-class collection of the finest of Japanese printmaking. Thank you very much.
So I should just say the photo that we're not looking at is a beautiful photo of Shawan and Patrick on the balcony of their gorgeous home in Frankfurt, Germany, with the city of Frankfurt in the distance and this June sunshine cascading down. So try and imagine what they look like. There couldn't be two more photogenic people. And in the light and what was to come, it was preordained that this amazing relationship would come to fruition. So on that note, thank you all for being with us. Thank you to our panelists who worked so hard to make this a really engaging and informative talk. My last slide was a photograph of the book. The book is obtainable on the Yale University website, the Yale University Art Gallery website. Please order it. It's a treasure. It's a treasure all by itself. And since Shawan and Patrick are not parting with their collection and you can't get so many of these prints are known in one impression left in the world, this is your only opportunity to look at them life-size, almost one-to-one, with exquisite printing, and of course, incredible insights by both Sadako and Adam. Stay tuned, August. On August 6th, we are turning our attention to the world of Japanese painting and to the amazing painting collection assembled, also about 300 works of art, interestingly, by Bob and Betsy Feinberg. And we'll have a distinguished panel again from another Ivy League school and a different point of view and a different collecting perspective to entertain you and hopefully inspire you. Thank you very much. I'm sorry we ran a little long, but I hope you feel it was worthwhile. And to our incredible panelists, I am very grateful for your hard work to make this such a wonderful event. Good night. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen.